July 15, 2024. A private jet landed quietly at Geneva Airport, carrying a passenger whose identity was carefully concealed from the media. Leonardo DiCaprio, at 49, was at another crossroads in his legendary career. But this journey wasn't about a film role, a business deal, or even an environmental cause. This was something far more personal and profound. 3 weeks earlier, DiCaprio had learned that Alain Delon, the legendary French actor who had defined European cinema for over 6 decades, was dying. The news had hit him harder than expected. While they had never worked together directly, DiCaprio had long considered Alain one of the greatest screen presences in cinema history, someone whose career represented everything he aspired to achieve in terms of artistic integrity and enduring influence. But it wasn't just professional admiration that drove DiCaprio to make this secret trip to Switzerland. At 49, he was beginning to confront questions that all successful actors eventually face. How do you age gracefully in an industry obsessed with youth? How do you maintain artistic integrity while navigating commercial pressures? How do you build a legacy that extends beyond box office numbers and award ceremonies? These were questions that Alain Delon had answered successfully over the course of a career that spanned from the late 1950s to the 2020s. At 88, Alain had not only survived the entertainment industry, he had conquered it on his own terms, maintaining his artistic integrity while achieving international stardom that few actors of any generation had equaled. DiCaprio's decision to seek out Alain was both spontaneous and carefully planned. He had contacted Alain's family through mutual acquaintances in the French film industry, explaining that he simply wanted to pay his respects to a master of the craft. What he didn't expect was for Alain to agree to a private meeting despite his declining health. "Leonardo," Alain had said in a brief phone call that arranged the meeting, his voice weak but still carrying the commanding presence that had made him famous. "Come quickly. I don't have long, but I have things to tell you that no one else in Hollywood will." The estate in Duchy was exactly what DiCaprio had expected from someone of Alain's taste and sophistication. Nestled in the Swiss countryside, the property combined classical elegance with understated luxury. There were no ostentatious displays of wealth, no Hollywood excess, just the refined aesthetic of a man who understood that true style was about subtlety rather than spectacle. When DiCaprio arrived, he was struck immediately by how frail Alain appeared, yet how alert and engaged his eyes remained. The physical decline was obvious, but the intelligence and charisma that had made him one of cinema's most magnetic figures were still very much present. "So," Alain said, as they settled in his private library, surrounded by books in multiple languages and photographs documenting 6 decades of extraordinary experiences, "you want to know how to have a career that lasts, not just 5 years, not just 10 years, but 60 years, yes?" DiCaprio nodded, surprised by the directness of the question. "I've been successful by most measures," he replied, "but I look at your career and I see something different. You've maintained your artistic integrity for 6 decades without compromising your standards. How is that possible in this industry?" What followed was a conversation that would fundamentally change how DiCaprio thought about his career, his choices, and his future in Hollywood. Alain's first piece of advice was about the danger of becoming trapped by your own success. "In America," he said, "you have this idea that more is always better. More money, more fame, more projects. But I learned early that sometimes the most important career decision is what you say no to, not what you say yes to." He described how, at the height of his fame in the 1960s and 1970s, he had turned down numerous Hollywood offers that would have made him enormously wealthy, but would have required him to compromise his artistic vision. "They wanted me to be the European version of American stars," he explained. "They wanted to remake me in their image. But I understood that if I did that, I would lose the very thing that made me valuable to them in the first place." DiCaprio found this perspective revelatory. Throughout his career, he had often felt pressure to take on projects that would maximize his commercial appeal, even when they didn't challenge him artistically. Alain's approach suggested a different path, one that prioritized artistic growth over commercial exploitation. The conversation then turned to the question of aging in Hollywood, a topic that DiCaprio knew he would increasingly have to confront. Alain's perspective was both practical and philosophical. American cinema is obsessed with youth because Americans are obsessed with the fantasy of eternal youth, Alain observed. But European cinema understands that there are different kinds of beauty, different kinds of power that come with different stages of life. The key is to evolve your choices to match your evolving self. Alain described how he had consciously shifted the types of roles he pursued as he aged, moving from romantic leads to character studies, from action heroes to psychological complexity. "I never tried to compete with younger actors on their terms," he said. "Instead, I offered what only experience can provide: depth, wisdom, gravitas. These are things that cannot be faked or bought." This perspective struck DiCaprio as profoundly liberating. Rather than seeing aging as a limitation, Alain presented it as an opportunity to access new dimensions of artistic expression that weren't available to younger performers. The discussion then turned to what Alain considered the most important aspect of a lasting career: the cultivation of respect rather than mere popularity. "Popularity is ephemeral," he said. "It comes and goes with trends and fashion. But respect, once earned, endures. And respect is earned through consistent excellence, not through publicity or marketing." Alain described how he had always prioritized working with the best directors, even when it meant taking smaller roles or less money. "I wanted to learn from masters," he explained. "Every film was an education. Every great director taught me something new about the craft. This is how you build a foundation that can support a lifetime career." DiCaprio realized that this approach was something he had intuitively followed but had never fully articulated. His choices to work with directors like Martin Scorsese, Christopher Nolan, and Alejandro Iñárritu suddenly made sense as part of a broader strategy for artistic development rather than just individual career moves. Perhaps the most profound part of their conversation focused on the question of legacy. Alain's perspective was both humble and ambitious. "I never set out to become a legend," he said. "I set out to become the best actor I could be. The legend part happened because I remained faithful to that goal for 60 years. Legacy is not something you can plan or manufacture. It is the natural result of decades of authentic commitment to excellence." This insight resonated deeply with DiCaprio, who had often felt pressure to think about his legacy in terms of awards, accolades, and historical significance. Alain's approach suggested that legacy was better understood as the cumulative effect of consistent artistic integrity rather than any specific achievement or recognition. As their conversation continued into the evening, Alain shared more specific advice about navigating the business aspects of a film career. He emphasized the importance of surrounding yourself with people who understand your artistic goals, rather than just your commercial value. "The biggest mistake actors make," he said, "is allowing their business relationships to override their artistic instincts. You must have agents and managers who respect your vision, not people who try to impose their vision on you." He also spoke about the importance of maintaining perspective about the entertainment industry itself. "Hollywood is not the entire world," he reminded DiCaprio. "There is great cinema being made everywhere.
in Europe, in Asia, in South America. If you only think about American commercial success, you limit yourself unnecessarily. This global perspective had obviously served Alain well throughout his career, allowing him to work with the greatest directors from multiple continents and to remain relevant to international audiences long after many of his contemporaries had faded from prominence. As the evening wound down, DiCaprio asked Alain what he considered the single most important piece of advice for maintaining artistic integrity over the long term. Alain's response was characteristically direct. Never forget why you started acting in the first place. Not for money, not for fame, but because you discovered that you could access truths through performance that you couldn't access any other way. If you stay connected to that original motivation, all the other decisions become easier. When DiCaprio left Duchy that night, he carried with him not just advice, but a fundamentally different framework for thinking about his career. The conversation had clarified priorities he hadn't even realized were unclear, and had given him permission to pursue artistic growth over commercial maximization. 3 weeks later, when news of Alain's death reached him, DiCaprio was devastated, but also grateful. He had been given a rare gift, the distilled wisdom of someone who had navigated the entertainment industry with extraordinary success while maintaining his artistic integrity and personal dignity. In the months following Alain's death, people close to DiCaprio began to notice changes in his approach to his career. He became more selective about projects, turning down several high-profile commercial films in favor of smaller, more challenging roles. He also began seeking out opportunities to work with international directors and to explore different forms of storytelling. When asked about these changes in interviews, DiCaprio would simply say that he was entering a new phase of his career, one focused on artistic growth rather than commercial expansion. He never mentioned his conversation with Alain, honoring the private nature of their meeting.
But the influence of that July evening was clear to anyone who understood what to look for. DiCaprio's subsequent choices reflected the wisdom he had absorbed from Alain, the importance of saying no to the wrong opportunities, the value of working with masters of the craft, and the understanding that true career longevity comes from consistent artistic integrity rather than commercial calculation. Industry insiders began to notice that DiCaprio was applying Alain's teachings in specific ways. His agent reported that he had started asking different questions about potential projects, not just about the role or the money, but about the director's vision, the artistic challenges the role would present, and how the film might contribute to his long-term artistic development. The shift was particularly evident in his approach to working with directors. Following Alain's advice about learning from masters, DiCaprio began seeking out opportunities to work with veteran filmmakers whose careers he admired, even when it meant taking smaller roles or working for less money than he could command elsewhere. His choice to work with veteran Italian director Paolo Sorrentino on a small independent film was seen by many as surprising, given that he could have chosen from numerous big-budget Hollywood productions. But those who understood DiCaprio's new philosophy recognized it as exactly the kind of decision Alain would have applauded, prioritizing artistic education over commercial reward. The conversation with Alain had also influenced DiCaprio's approach to aging in Hollywood. Rather than fighting against the natural progression of time, he began embracing the opportunities that came with maturity. His performances took on a new depth and gravitas that critics noted was reminiscent of the great European actors who had successfully transitioned from young leading men to distinguished character actors. Film critics began to notice what they described as a new European sensibility in DiCaprio's work, a willingness to explore psychological complexity, a comfort with silence and subtlety, and an understanding that great acting often involved what wasn't said as much as what was. These were all hallmarks of the European acting tradition that Alain had embodied throughout his career. The impact extended beyond just DiCaprio's individual choices. His new approach began to influence other actors in his peer group, many of whom looked to him as a model for how to navigate the challenges of sustained success in Hollywood. Without ever explicitly discussing his conversation with Alain, DiCaprio was passing along the wisdom he had received, creating a ripple effect throughout the industry. The entertainment industry has taken notice of DiCaprio's evolution, with many commenting that his recent work has a depth and gravitas that suggests a new level of artistic maturity. Critics have praised his willingness to take risks and to challenge himself in ways that many established stars avoid. Entertainment journalists have noted that DiCaprio seems more selective about his public appearances and more focused on the craft of acting rather than the business of celebrity. This shift toward privacy and artistic focus reflected another piece of Alain's wisdom, that true artists should let their work speak for itself rather than relying on publicity and marketing to maintain their relevance. The influence of Alain's teachings also became apparent in DiCaprio's approach to international cinema. He began expressing interest in working with directors from different continents, and he started funding smaller international projects through his production company. This global perspective was clearly inspired by Alain's advice about not limiting oneself to American commercial success.
Hollywood executives and producers began to notice that DiCaprio's projects were becoming more prestigious and critically acclaimed, even when they weren't necessarily big box office successes. This reflected Alain's teaching that respect and legacy were more valuable than immediate commercial rewards. The conversation had also given DiCaprio a new framework for thinking about his philanthropic and environmental work. Alain had emphasized the importance of using one's platform for purposes beyond self-promotion, and DiCaprio began to integrate his artistic choices with his advocacy work in more sophisticated ways. What they don't know is that this transformation was inspired by a 4-hour conversation with a dying legend who understood that the greatest gift one artist can give to another is not praise or encouragement, but wisdom earned through decades of experience and reflection. The secret meeting between Leonardo DiCaprio and Alain Delon represents something beautiful and rare in an industry often characterized by competition and ego. The generous passing of wisdom from one generation to the next, the recognition that great art is a collaborative endeavor that transcends individual careers and ambitions. The story also serves as a reminder of the value of seeking mentorship from those who have successfully navigated the challenges you are facing. DiCaprio's willingness to make the journey to Switzerland, to sit quietly and listen to someone with vastly more experience, demonstrated a humility that is often rare among established stars. For Alain, the meeting represented one final opportunity to pass along the insights he had accumulated over 6 decades in the entertainment industry. His willingness to share his wisdom with a younger actor from a different tradition demonstrated the generosity of spirit that had characterized his entire career. If this incredible story of artistic mentorship and generational wisdom inspired you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who believes in the importance of learning from those who came before us. And tell us in the comments, what's the most valuable career advice you've ever received? Because sometimes the most important conversations happen away from the cameras and the crowds, in quiet moments between people who understand the true meaning of artistic excellence.